Good afternoon, everyone. How are you? My name is John Green, and I'm one of the business development managers here at Datamark. And I'll be your moderator today for our presentation on implementing a statewide next-gen 911 system in Alabama. Before we get started, just a couple housekeeping items. Everybody has been muted just for quality assurance purposes and audio quality purposes. So we do want you to ask questions, though. There's a chat feature. If you do have questions, you can share those with us through the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat window too. We'll try to answer those questions as we go along, and maybe even have some time there at the end to address any questions we don't get to. And then, should we run out of time, we'll definitely follow up with you with answers to any questions that we didn't have a chance to address during the presentation. Let's start with some introductions. Again, my name is John Green. I'm just going to go around the room here and allow folks to introduce themselves. And we'll start with the Alabama folks. Lee?
So I'm Leah Misseldine. I'm the Executive Director here in the state of Alabama. I come from the PSAP like maybe some of our participants do. And for those of you that are, I want to say Happy Telecommunicators Week to you all. So thank you for everything that you do. I've been in the 911 business for about 23 years, and I think it's a fun time to be in 911, and I really appreciate your time and attention and attendance today. So, Adam.
I'm Adam Brown. I'm the Deputy Director here at the Alabama 911 Board. I have also been in 911 for quite some time, working on 21 years this year. Also come from the PSAP, just like Leah. We are happy that you joined us today, and we're excited to share this portion of our Next Generation 911 project with you.
Hey, I'm Anderson Brooms, GIS Program Manager here at the office. I don't come from a PSAP. I've been in the GIS industry for 19 years. 13 years of that has been supporting public safety and 911 operations at the municipal level.
All right, thank you. And Bob, go ahead and introduce yourself as well.
Good afternoon, and to echo Leah's sentiments, happy National Telecommunicators Week to everybody out there. Thanks for everything that you're doing for your communities, for the industry, and most importantly, thanks for everything you do for your families. I think we all understand the level of commitment that you're putting in, and we certainly value that and appreciate that. Bob Murphy, I have the distinct pleasure to serve as the Director of Business Development here for Datamark, and I'll follow the path that Lee and Adam have followed, whereas I started off as a telecommunicator in southwestern Pennsylvania. And prior to joining the Datamark team, I served as the 911 Communications Chief for Okaloosa County Department of Public Safety here in Northwest Florida. So real excited to be here with everybody today, and I will lead us through a high-level introduction of the Alabama project and some of the journey that they've experienced as they've began to initiate and begin this incredible transition to next generation 911 geospatial call routing. And then, as John said, we'll get into an opportunity. We have some time to take some questions and do some roundtable discussion about some of the experiences.
All right, thanks, Bob. And again, I have the question and answer page open here. As questions come to you, please just feel free to jot those in the Q&A window, and like I say, we'll try to address those as we go along. We're going to start with just a quick PowerPoint. Bob's going to give us an overview of next generation 911, and then the majority of the presentation today is really going to be a panel discussion between with everyone involved here on the panel. So, Bob, without further ado, take it away.
Okay. So as John indicated, we're going to kind of take a deep dive through NG9-1-1 GIS, the Alabama journey, some lessons that we learned along the way. And I say we because as we kind of talk about this project here of implementing statewide NG9-1 as it relates to GIS specifically, these are really have been lessons that we've learned collectively, not only from a vendor perspective of how we approached our partnership with them, but also, we've learned once we've deployed working with the local partners and the ECDs here in the state, and then certainly just from a relationship perspective. So really want to talk around three really fundamental initiatives that we have to accomplish when we looked at this project and other large, either regional or statewide projects. And it really comes down to data, workflows, and governance of how we're going to pull together this statewide next generation 9-1 initiative. This can be anything from, from the GIS workflow to NGINA core services, really all of those, data and technology kind of are two areas that kind of coalesce with one another. Workflows and everything that we need to do, how we're going to make it work, and then governance as far as who's going to have a responsibility and really be driving those components of the initiative. So as we take a little step further into the data for NG9-1, again specifically to GIS and a geospatial call routing solution, there's only 3 components that we're looking at, and that's NGINA Next Gen Core Services and then our 9-1 call handling equipment. And from an NGINA perspective, the data recommendations from NG Core Services support call routing through the ESINet. So, the ESINet, think of that, for those of you who are looking to learn more about this or just some clarification, NGINA is really our pathway and our vehicle to transport all things NG9-1. So that's going to, that's the backbone, replace the old copper piping, copper tubes and copper wires, everything that we've been using, move that over to a data environment where we can actually move and share data with one another. Next generation core services, these support and utilize GIS to identify our location and are used for our location validation and call routing functionality. So you might hear some folks refer to that as the core service functional elements, ECRF, LVF, spatial interface. So all those those different components that are determining location of the caller, location of the PSAP, location of the emergency service, responsible party, all of those components really reside inside the core services. And then from a 9-1 call handling perspective, this is your CPE, your 9-1 phone, your 9-1 map. Certainly GIS is leveraged inside that call handling solution. Again, supported from the NGINA to the core services, deliver it into the PSAP at our telecommunicators' hands in the 9-1 call handling equipment. Mapping solution to identify, where our callers are at. And that data that's sitting inside that mapping solution should be really the same data that's being used and supported inside your core services. It may be the same data you use inside your CAD solution or any ancillary PSAP applications, third-party interfaces. You look at third-party and hybrid location information. All of those services and applications are using that GIS data to make those very informed decisions of where we're heading. So as we look at that, the common occurrence we see in all that is that there's data moving in and around each of those components. And because there's so much data to be used, NINA, the National Emergency Number Association, which I'm sure most, if not everybody on this call has at least heard of or had an opportunity to read through some of their standards, standard development work groups, best practices, information documents. There are a plethora of documents out there for us to reference on how we're going to move about that. So on the screen now, you should be seeing kind of a sampling of some of those standards and best practices. Certainly the top left-hand side there, the NINA I3 solution. That's really overarching and all-encompassing of how that in totality the NG9-1 solution is going to kind of come together and the requirements for those components. As we look at specifically the GIS component of that, there's a number of other standards, best practices, information documents that we want to reference to that. And I think one thing that some folks consider along the way is we automatically point to the NG9-1 GIS data model, 6.1.1 of 2020, the most current revision, of being the all-encompassing solution, all-encompassing standard that we have to reference when we're looking at NG9-1. And unfortunately, that's not always the case. There's a lot of times that we are going to be referencing, for example, the CLDXF standard, how the GIS is going to interact with the ECRF and the LVF. So there's a standard on that, specifically 5.1.1 of what those requirements are, how the ECRF, how the LVF are going to function and operate with that. What are the requirements? 3-day discrepancy turnaround times. So there's a lot of different elements, and it's important for folks to take a deeper dive, really understand what these standards are saying, how they interact with one another. And if you haven't read a NGINA standard from front to back before. It's a big experience, and I will say that what happens a lot of time is you end up jumping in between various standards. So that's one thing of note, and one thing that we've learned, along the way is we've worked on projects that it requires you to be informed. It requires a cooperative relationship, not only with the vendors, but with the customers and partners that you're working with. Everybody has a good, solid understanding of what that looks like. So next component of the data is the data layers, and I'm sure everybody's heard, there are 5 required layers in order to move to next gen 9-1. But that's our starting point, and the reason they're required is that's the baseline. So as we look at the baseline data requirements to move to an NG9-1 GIS spatial car routing solution, specifically what we're working with the folks in Alabama on is PSAP boundaries, road center lines, emergency service boundaries, site structure address points, and then your provisioning boundaries. I think it's important that not one of those data layers will achieve the end goal of getting to GIS spatial car routing. We really need all of those to embark on the transitional element that we're heading for. So the required layers, they've got to be available because they're going to be used by the ECRF and the LVF, so the call routing function and the location validation function, in order to initiate that call, get it into the correct PSAP, and identify the responders that are going to respond to that. And certainly, as we look at beyond that and how we can make more informed decisions, we're looking at those strongly recommended and recommended layers. All those things that as a telecommunicator, as a PSAP operations manager, and certainly as a statewide 9-1 director, the more data that can be available to make decisions for first responders and emergency response, the better. So adding things like landmarks and street names, things that we typically include in our CAD system when we're looking at dispatch and routing. Counties incorporated versus unincorporated. Those of you who have a large area of unincorporated in your jurisdiction, sometimes it's difficult. We look at annexations. So is it maybe a sheriff's jurisdiction or is it a municipality jurisdiction? Things along those lines. And then additional emergency service boundaries are also important. Poison control, forestry, Coast Guard, all those different agencies that we work with that are outside that traditional law, fire, EMS boundary. And then certainly we look at additionals, your railroads, hydrologies, cell sectors, mile marker locations. If you're dealing with, perhaps you're a coastal community, you've got beaches, but you don't have structures tied anywhere near that. So can you map out your mile markers along the beach, along trails, along these very rural areas where there's not an address point or a structure nearby to identify that. So the more data we have, the more informed decisions we can make, the better chance we have to increase our response capabilities. Again, supporting that overall goal of achieving next gen 9-1. So as we took all of that and we looked at how are we going to help Alabama take the good work that they've done thus far with their statewide solution and get them to a point where they can start geospatially routing calls. So we've broken this up into really 6 different categories, and the first of that being what we refer to as a gap analysis part 1. And what we've done in that gap analysis part 1 is conducted an overall assessment of the health of the data that supports their GIS schema. So looking at it from an ECD level, so breaking the entire state down into 85 ECDs, compiling their data, evaluating their data, and looking at the health of their data. Once we can complete that overall health assessment, then we provide the ECDs and the state back a report, and we provided some recommendations on what do they need to do to move to the next step, to move on to the second phase, which is remediation. Certainly through all those ways, all those standards that we talked about earlier, reviewing the NGINA standards, we're trying to educate everybody along the way because we really want to set everybody up for success there. Next phase of that, schema remediation, working with those folks to get that data cleaned up so that we can move them on to the next phase, which is getting them onboarded into VEP. VEP is a solution that we utilized in Alabama. It's our Validate Edit Provision tool. That's really going to serve as a data supply chain for us from a local level to the state. load the data in, provide training, get their schema mapped and documented, create a map package for them to use to maintain the data, and then move that over into what we refer to as a gap 2 portion, where now we've identified minimum schema requirements. We've got the data into an instance of EEP. Now we can begin to identify how do we move their data from the minimum criteria to get into the solution to a more usable data set, starting to clean that up. So again, we provide that report back with recommendations and standard reference documents over, so we can begin doing data remediation. So, like many states and like many localities are represented on the call today, I'm sure that you're dealing with a wide array of diversification within your municipalities, your GIS shops. So a lot of folks are working on themselves, and they're able to accomplish the data corrections. Some folks have reached out and said, hey, we need services from, whether it be us or other GIS vendors to get that data cleaned up. Well, we're beginning to move forward to support that and move that along the way. And then once that data is remediated and it meets the minimum criteria, now we're in a position where we can aggregate the data, move it to the statewide data set. And you'll see here a little bit later kind of the advancement of that project and kind of where we're at from the time we've kicked it off of starting to contribute to that statewide data set. And then certainly once we're to that point, now we move into a maintenance phase. We have the data that meets NGINA standard. We've got high quality and we've got high quality complete data sets. So now we continue to run validations, maintain the data. Again, leveraging VEP is that data supply chain. So we continue this process. It's an iterative process. It's ongoing. The one thing that we think we all recognize is that once we're there and we're at that point, we have that statewide data set, we can't stop. We can't take our foot off the pedal. We've got to keep moving. Development's going to occur. Data changes are going to occur. So we have to keep that maintenance phase moving forward. So to take a step further and now start looking at some of the workflow perspectives that we had to identify and recognize is, again, talking about diversification of not only our PSAPs, but of our GIS shops. We really put the diversification and capabilities in the really 4 categories. Limited capacity at a local agency, and this is fortunately or unfortunately where a lot of our folks are at across the industry is they've got limited or no GIS capabilities on staff or within the PSAP. They may be supported from a maintenance provider, maybe a CAD provider is maintaining data for you, maybe your call handling equipment provider is maintaining data for you, but it's not ongoing, it's not intuitive, it's really kind of ad hoc and maybe some forklift changes along the year. Then we look in the other PSAPs and GIS shops that maybe are multitasking abilities. So they have a PSAP which is supported by a GIS professional. In a lot of cases, what we see here is these are our CAD technicians and our CAD administrators that are responsible for kind of managing the data for the CAD system. And they have limited experience, limited capabilities to perform some GIS work and GIS capabilities. Maybe they don't have some of the most robust tools at their tool set, so they're working with some open source GIS tools. And then we look at those very sophisticated agencies where they're a very mature organization. These are typically your larger cities, larger robust counties, more metro that have a very mature enterprise solution. They've got anywhere between 5 and 10 GIS experts that are working on staff. They're working in enterprise deployments. We look at all of that, and what we discovered is this solution that we're going to put forward has to address the needs of all 3 of those type of agencies and with those capabilities. One-stop shop, one size fits all does not work when we're looking at deploying solutions like this. So you have to have flexibility and scalability to make it work, because the end goal in this case is our state agency that's going to support the aggregation and validation. They're going to use that as their tool set to provision to the core services from a statewide perspective. So, we had to look at that and say, how are we going to solve these problems? How are we going to take a very complex agency and tell them that they need to do something a little bit different? How do we insert a workflow to the robust shop to get them to support the state's initiatives? But at the same token, how do we walk into, an agency that has very limited capabilities and say, we need to help you with these tools. You've got to do this with your data. and it has to be at this level by this date in order to support the state. So, we had to identify a couple ways to accomplish that. And one of the first things we looked at was data supply chain. We can put tools at everybody's level. We can give them the support to get the data squared away, to get it to beyond that 98%. But how do we move the data from the very, very local level to the highest level? And we recognized that with a robust data supply chain process, that certainly we're going to be on a common operating platform. It's going to allow us to really reach in and provide that authoritative data source. We really want to manage and enhance our risk and efficiencies. So, if we can expose those risks and mitigate them, then that should likely increase our efficiencies and make for a better project. So we had to identify who are all these folks that we need to reach out to increase the supply chain. And this is not all encompassing, because as we look at these different areas and different partners that we've worked with, within the state, it could be, the addressing authority. It could be the 911 system manager. It could be a third party 911 authority, core services, DoD, infrastructure. So all these different areas and different responsibilities. Public Works might have some responsibility to that. We've got to reach in and work with them. Alabama DOT, Alabama GIO's office, all of these different organizations that have a play to GIS. Maybe they have data that somebody doesn't have. Maybe they could be an end user of some of the data. So how do we pull them in to get that common operating picture established? And as I said earlier, the tool we leveraged for that was VEP. And what we've done here, I'm just going to advance the slides. If I get my slide to catch up. Sorry, guys, I got some lag going on here. But what we're seeing here is when we look at how we move that data, we had to solve the problem. And if you look at city D in the small green, city D represents a very robust city. So this is a metro city here in Alabama that has the ability to maintain data. They're managing their data really well. How do I get their data from that city level to the county level? And then certainly with the end goal of moving it to the state. So VEP allowed us to do that because it's an agnostic approach. It allows that workflow to be intuitive. Is we can put VEP inside the city, put VEP in the county, allow that instance to be created so they can share data with one another. And then what happens from there, sorry guys, I really got some lag this afternoon. If I can get this lag to work. So we've taken the city inside the county, contribute to the county data set. Now we've taken 2 additional counties, and we're really working with a big giant puzzle, right? So we're just trying to put the puzzle together. Now, County A and County B, they're maintaining data for everybody in the county. So that was easy for us. We can just consume that ECD or county level data, pull that all together, match those in, run cross-jurisdictional validations, and now we've begun to create that aggregated data set from a state level perspective. So, again, the VEP solution worked for us and worked for Alabama because it allowed us to flex the ability to meet the needs of, again, the very low level or the very high level organization. So I'm going to skip through some of the stuff in the interest of time to talk about some things that I think are most important to folks on the call today. And as we look at some responsibilities and rules, your data owner, that's they have the ultimate authority to decide access, who's getting data, how you're going to share it. And then of course your data steward, that's really your expert in charge of ensuring that data represents, high quality to support the business needs at a very, very granular level. And there are a lot of other folks that we've got to touch, the 911 authority. So that could be your PSAP, could be the state in this case, addressing authorities and all your GIS providers. But, in the grand scheme of things, the authority is the one that's going to identify the GIS data to be used in the ECRF or the LVF. So they are the ones that say, you're going to use this data to support this solution. So there's not an all-encompassing list, but there's a high-level list of, some of their responsibilities. As we look at our GIS data provider, they have the responsibility and are charged with working with the 911 authorities to determine the policies and responsibilities to support that overall goal. we're going to work with these folks hand in hand because they're creating, maintaining the document and documenting the GIS data and make sure that it adheres to the NGINA standards. And ultimately, they're the ones that are working to supply the data to support the spatial interface. So they are extremely critical in this step, as everybody is. And then certainly as we take a look at the addressing authorities, we've got to identify processes to make sure that as they're assigning addresses, that those addresses conform to public safety standards, to NGINA standards. I think one thing that a lot of folks that are working on across the industry right now is sub-addressing. And, I can say that in my time as a former 911 director, I had the responsibility in my department to assign addresses. And sometimes we did things to make it work, to meet the residents' need. And we had to bend some rules, and that may impact us down the road as we begin to transition to NG9-1. So addressing authorities are critically important to this step in the overall process, and we've got to involve those folks. So that's real high level. I'm trying to be mindful of time, John, because I know we've got a Q&A period. So I'll get to the last section here. We're going to kind of leave this slide here for folks to kind of take a look at. But, hats off to the Alabama team at the state level, because they have just moved this project forward exponentially. There's kind of a representation of where we're at. We're happy to say we've got 18 ECDs that have been moved into VEP already in full. So we're moving folks along at a really quick level. And we'll talk a little bit through the questions here. That could not have happened without the coordination and cooperation coming out of the Alabama 911 office. They have an incredible relationship with the locals, not only the local ECDs, but local governments, state governments and stakeholders. And that's an overall key to success. And I think we'll talk a little bit about that here in a few seconds. So
All
John,
right.
any questions on any of that? And if not, I'll go ahead and mute.
All right. Yeah, a few questions have come in here recently, but we've answered those in the chat. And there's actually one that we're actually going to address during the Q&A session. So it's a great forethought there on that particular question. But Bob, thanks for giving us a good detailed overview. And as you mentioned, hats off to the Alabama folks. This project has really taken hold, and to have this many ECDs on board in that short amount of time is just phenomenal. It's the fastest I've ever seen a project move. So, all right. So let's spend the next 30 minutes or so with just some roundtable discussion, some Q&A. And again, as questions come to you as we're talking, please use either the chat or the question and answer window. The question and answer window is probably a little easier because that goes out to everybody that way and everybody can see the answers. But yeah, as questions come to you, please feel free to ask. All right, so we're celebrating National Telecommunicators Week here this week. Earlier this year we had another 911 celebration, a 911 birthday. So it all started in Alabama, actually. 911 itself got its roots there in Alabama. And earlier this year we celebrated the birth of 911 across the entire nation. So Lee, can you tell us a little bit about that, and can you tell us a little bit more about the background of 911 there in Alabama?
Sure. So the birthplace of 911, as they like to say, is in Haleyville, Alabama, which is very rural, as is most Alabama, but certainly was in 1968, I believe. So about 53 years ago, Alabama happened to be the first to pull off a completed 911 call, shortly followed by other jurisdictions in other states. It was sort of what was on the hearts and minds of a lot of people as far as getting emergency help to those in need. So thankfully, Alabama was able to, like I said, pull that off and kind of set the stage for what we here in Alabama like to call or consider a pretty rich history in 911, and is sort of the motivating or driving factor for this profession here in Alabama, and hopefully nationally and globally even. So.
Excellent. So Adam, Alabama, you guys have been working towards NGINA 9-1-1 for a while now. Can you give us a little background, a little history on where that got started and, some of the steps along the way and some of the lessons learned?
Sure. So we started our Next Generation 9-1 journey back in 2009. Our predecessor agency, the Alabama Wireless Board, applied for, I believe it was a federal DOT grant, and then RFP to procure Next Generation 9-1-1 services, utilizing an internal statewide educational network at the time. Went through, working through that process, working with that particular vendor, and they got to a point where they could go no further. And then in 2016, we had another RFP for what we affectionately call now as Engine 2.0, the Alabama Next Generation Emergency Network. Procured the services of Individual, who is our current system service provider. And we, as of the beginning of this year, lack one district, one PSAP, one 911 center from having the ESNET completely built out, and moving forward with the other steps of that process as far as conversion of the wireline carriers and the VoIP carriers and all that. One thing that I forgot to note about the original engine project is, even though that theory of using the state educational network didn't completely pan out, it wasn't by any means a failure. We did achieve complete aggregation of all wireless carriers, which most people who know 911 know that's 75 to 80% of the traffic. We did aggregate all them to our two data centers prior to Individual taking the project to the next steps, which, I mean, that is an amazing feat, because all of our wireless traffic has been navigated through the IP network since 2017, or 14, I'm sorry, December of 14, which was before my time. But all in all, I mean, yes, we learned some lessons. We're still learning lessons, and this is an ever evolving, ever emerging technology, and I mean, you have to stay a little limber to be able to catch up with it.
I've noticed in the chat, I think maybe we need to talk a little bit about governance here in the state of Alabama, just to make some clarification points, because it's always nice to know where you're starting from, specifically as far as ECDs versus PSAPs. So our board here serves as the main fiscal and technological agent in the state of Alabama. We have 85 districts, what they call emergency communication districts. It is not the same as a PSAP. There may be multiple PSAPs within a district, but kind of think about the district as sort of the business office that we have a funding relationship with, and then they're at the more local level, which would be 67 county ECDs, and then what's the difference there? 19?
I think it's 19 municipal.
Yeah, 19 municipal districts. But kind of think about emergency communication district as they may be the PSAP, but there may be one of more than one PSAP in that jurisdiction. So I think that might bear a little bit of clarification. But we have 85 districts, and we have 120 primary PSAPs here in the state of Alabama. And then, of course, you have all the secondary PSAPs, whether they be ambulance services, the State Highway Patrol, some of your non-traditional or less than traditional PSAPs, DOD, just other university campuses, things like that. So I hope that clarifies just a touch.
Absolutely. That's actually great. That took care of 3 questions at once.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, a couple of the chat questions, and then a couple of questions that I had to ask too. So Anderson, we've been working together to collect GIS data all throughout the state here over the next little bit. Tell us about your experience in collecting that data, the different sources that it comes from. What's one of the biggest challenges in getting GIS data?
Getting GIS data. I mean, going out and collecting it. I think we are currently, as Leah mentioned, there's 85 ECDs in the state. And I believe we've collected 67 data sets in either complete totality of the 7 mandatory layers plus extra down to, no address points, but a road centerline layer that might have been derivative from Tiger Line files and no address ranges in them. File types range from shape files, file geodatabases, all the way up to some of our more robust advanced GIS shops have enterprise level version geodatabases. The flip side of that is sometimes we work off flat Excel tables that we're having to geocode addresses off of. So it runs the full spectrum of data sources.
Definitely coming from a plethora of sources there for sure. I think there's even a couple that are non-traditional GIS. They're intergraph based, and so that data is being converted from that over into Esri. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the roadmap moving forward. Leah, tell us about the state's roadmap for Next Gen 9-1-1. What's next on the list?
Whatever comes next. So we'll try not to give too many cheeky responses like that, since that was our answer to the last 2 questions. But in all seriousness, Adam and I both spoke to this. Bob spoke to this earlier. Coming from the PSAB, we have a pretty real awareness of how all of these things that we're trying to do at the state level impact the operations for the person sitting in the seat. And I'll be honest with you, that's what's always in the back of my mind. Sometimes I have to take our board members through that and the decisions we're making to say, hey, let's always keep this in the back of our minds. But our mission statement, in part, and I won't quote it directly, but is to work in partnership with our districts and provide the efficient and effective 911 service across the state, regardless of what the emerging technology is. And if anybody knows Alabama, you know that it's all rural, really. We have a few little pockets of population density, but we have a lot of 1 and 2 seat PSAPs. We have a lot of, over 50%. I think Adam just did our data compilation for the National 911 Office and our report to Congress, but I think probably 50% of them are less than 4 seats. So we always have that in the back of our mind to how can we make this job more efficient, more effective for them, and how can we serve the citizens and visitors to the state of Alabama. It's always a desire to tackle whatever comes next. And technology is coming at us so quickly that what our roadmap was even 6 months ago, what our roadmap was, especially for the GIS project, and Data Mark, you know this, we've had to kind of reformat some things and remap some things just because somebody said, hey, this is a really big issue right now. So I would tell you that as we layer on a redundant, scalable, reliable, resilient network with our EZNet provider and our NG Core Services provider, and then we layer into that call handling solutions, and then we layer into that GIS data and potentially minimum standards and all those sorts of things, our roadmap leads to whatever comes next that promotes the service that we're providing here in Alabama. More of a philosophical discussion than really a actual roadmap, but that's where we're headed.
Excellent, thank you. This next question here has more to do with GIS data readiness. So, in regard to prioritizing that readiness, what really drove the state to proceed with the GIS component of the Next Gen project at this time, as opposed to, maybe starting it back even before Core Services was started?
Well, in all honesty, we're just playing the hand we were dealt. So, as I alluded to earlier, the next generation 911 portion of this project, of Core Services and Internet, it was initiated by our predecessor agency, and none of us worked here at that time. So we, took that, moved it forward, got the resources that were necessary to move that project to completion, which we're almost there with that particular part of it. And then the GIS data portion of it just seemed like the next logical step. Once we have this network that is fully deployed and able to send call traffic over, we want to be able to use the core services to its full capability. So to do that, you need the GIS data set aggregated at a statewide level.
Excellent. Thank you.
Hey, John, there's two questions in the Q&A that I won't be able to take a dive at, so I'd like to pitch them over to the Alabama team if we can.
Sure. I'm going to read the first one. When Alabama started around 2014 or 2016, were there the same number of ECDs exist, or did this migration to NG9-1 change the number of ECDs, increase or decrease the number of districts? Actually, we've seen a decrease in the number of districts. And I would like to tell you that NG9-1 has produced technology solutions and put those in place to allow for the decrease in that. But I'll just tell you, I don't think it was really a driver of the decrease in the number of districts. Actually, it was, sort of born out of local or political needs in those jurisdictions, and has diminished it from 88 is what we started with to 85 now. So the next question is, how is your funding derived for your NG9-1 efforts? So as Adam has already spoken to, we had a predecessor board. They saw fit at some point along the way, back in the early 2000s, to go to a statewide 911 fee. And so we ultimately collect the statewide 911 fee from all of the subscribers that either choose to buy prepaid or what we call postpaid, like on your cellular phone bill or home phone bill or business phone bill. So we have that collection that's done here at this office. I will say that if you look on paper, Alabama appears to have one of the highest statewide or 911 service fees. However, it is illegal for anybody else to assess a fee on a subscriber in the state of Alabama. So that really is the only collection of 911 service fees that goes on here. So that is set at a statewide rate. And then by legislation, we're required to carve out that fund, the 911 fund, to fund all the local districts, which well over 90% is just passed through, goes right back out to the operational centers across the state. And then our NG9-1 efforts are funded out of a portion of that doesn't go directly out to the districts. This office runs off 1% of the fund. We have some other things that we pay for as far as statewide audits and just other governmental services, I'll say. So that's how we pay for our NG9-1 efforts. And one more question, I may have missed this in the presentation, but how many counties in Alabama have point address data? What steps are being made to reach the non-GIS counties to build out the data? I'm actually going to let Anderson speak to that. They've shown a dashboard already. And I would like to say one thing, that in the spooling this project up since the contract was signed in October, we've discovered that there's really an expectation that a lot of our districts have data that they might not actually have, or they have piece parts of data. And we've really had to, as Anderson joked earlier, getting our hands on it to see what they do and don't have is sort of been a bigger hill to climb than I think we thought. But Anderson can speak specifically to the numbers.
So I think the question was how many counties, and I think it was spoken earlier. We have 67 counties here in the state of Alabama, but we also have a number of municipal ECDs totaling to the number of 85. As of today, we've collected 67 data sets. So if my fuzzy math is correct, that's 18 that we just don't have any insight into currently what level of data they have. So of the 67, I think the last count was somewhere, it was 8 or 9, did not have any address points, site structure points whatsoever. We have been able to reach out to some that just do not utilize GIS in any way, and they've provided us with Excel tables that I've run through the ArcGIS Online World Geocoder as a start, knowing that has to be massively QC'd, which partly we hope the validator will be able to do. You know, so I'm actually interested to run that through that. And, you know, we have an MSAG table and an alley table from InDigital, the next gen service provider, that we're just trying to piece and cobble together any data sources we can, whether it be Tigerline files from the census or DOT road files or whatever the case may be, and just doing old school, you know, nuts and bolts GIS work by applying address ranges based on the address points that come out of the World Geocoder.
So what he means is we'll take anything and try to make something out of it.
Make it work.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. I think that took care of the questions there in the chat so far. And again, the great questions, guys. Please keep these coming. This is a great roundtable discussion here. But so let's talk about some of the data considerations here. You know, the National Emergency Number Association, I'll be able to talk here in a moment. NGINA has, they've created, of course, the GIS data model. You know, it's a standard to allow interoperability for 911 centers and, you know, even across local and state lines. You know, while that's very valuable, it doesn't also always support the needs of the local ECDs or the local PSAPs. So I know with this project, do you really foresee all ECDs adopting the NGINA data model? If not, how's that being resolved?
So to speak a little bit back to governance, Alabama is, I mean, it's local control. So we get that in this office loud and clear, and we come from that place of knowing that we're facilitating projects that then need to, I mean, in the next gen environment, you need to tie into your neighbor, you know, and here we are trying to tie into Tennessee, Georgia, Mississippi, Florida, and those sorts of things. So you kind of have to marry up the priority between the standard, which someplace to target, and then the local operations and the governance there at the local level. And I'll just say that's a lot of what we do with the relationships that we have in this office. I'll say it's been my experience. I came into this office about 6 weeks after its inception. So I've been here from almost the beginning. I'll just say that a lot of our local districts are willing and able to rise to the occasion and meet a specific standard or schema if we'll provide it to them or walk them through it or help them get there. I don't know if either Adam or Anderson want to add to that, but at this point, you know, getting all the data in one place and then QCing it is pretty heavy lift. So.
Yeah, there's definitely a desire. I think, you know, anytime we relay either best practice or standard or something like that, there's definitely a desire from our districts to want to meet or exceed that. A lot of the limitations is the current systems in use. So we needed a solution that would allow for both, essentially allow us to work in this legacy environment or whatever schema is necessary for their local systems, whether that be a CAD system or what have you, map viewer. But, you know, we were able to get a solution that would also allow for that same data to be translated into the NGINA schema when necessary.
So more of an extract, transform, and load solution than forcing a schema across all ECDs, which I know sometimes that can be very, very tricky. Anytime that you start messing around with someone's schema, it can break a ton of different stuff. So,
well, I mean, keeping in mind that some of these places too, their data sets are being used for more than just 911. So you have to consider that too.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, those data sets go into multiple different systems, and you know, you can change one field and pull down an entire website. So it's a great way to do it. You mentioned CAD. Talk to me a little bit about how this is affecting the CAD community, and you know, the being able to do you see the CAD vendors adopting NGINA standards moving forward, and how does that affect the project as a whole?
hopeful they will. I think based on conversations we've had either during or even prior to this project, the GIS portion of this Next Generation 9-1-1 project, yeah, I think they're headed in that direction. Again, I'm hopeful they are, because that will just make things move a lot smoother when we're all consuming from the same data service, the same data set. So yeah, I believe to stay viable, you're going to have to craft your product to be able to work within the Next Generation 9-1-1 environment. Now, how long it takes you to do that or when that's going to be necessary, who knows? We're pushing for as soon as we possibly can. But I think to stay viable, yes, you have to work within at least a recognized standard to be able to operate in that environment.
Well, I know working with databases in the past, it's always a blessing whenever you can go back to a standard and be able to have a definite way of translating data back and forth. You know, even look at an MSTAG or an ALI database, having those fields defined and having a defined schema, it just makes things a lot easier. So it's encouraging to hear the CAG community coming along beside you there.
Well, that also speaks to, particularly from our seat, and then anybody in the local government, in the leadership position in the educational realm. We have found people very willing to work with us, vendors very willing to work with us, if we were able to take the time and explain sort of the vision or the end goal. And we don't always use the same language. I mean, we're laden with alphabet soup and spaghetti and all that kind of stuff as far as acronyms go. But if so far we've been successful in having those conversations and kind of forging ahead with what our ideal environment will be, realizing this whole time that we're in a transition, and 9-1-1's not one of those things you can take down, rebuild, and then turn on. You have to run the legacy alongside the next gen for sometimes a long time to get there.
No doubt.
Absolutely, yeah. That legacy gateway is going to be viable for a long ways into the future, I think. All right, we're up on about 8 minutes till, so I'm going to skip down to and talk about educating and organizing the Alabama 9-1-1 community. And so Anderson, how much does education of the GIS and the 9-1-1 community on what's needed to prepare for Next Gen 9-1-1? How big of a lift is that, and how you guys handling it? What tools are you using?
Education is a critical component of helping us help the ECDs. You only know what you don't know when you don't know it, right? So we have, prior to the contract being signed in October, I was hired in March, and I spent a great deal of my time reaching out to ECDs, doing webinars, educating them on, as simple topics as what GIS is, up to the NGINA data model, the standards, and the mandatory layers, and prepping them for data submission. A big component of our data modification in the transition from, we'll use legacy GIS into next gen, is the parsing of the mandatory addressing fields for road center lines and address points, and a lot of ECDs just did not realize that was going to be a thing, and educating them on what that is and why that's an important factor. Because the first thing they ask is, well, I've got addresses. I've got street names. Why do I need to split it out and do these things? And so education, I would say, is a vital component of what we do here in this office.
Well, I think that's that shows in the amount of progress you guys have been able to make in this short amount of time, getting that word out there ahead of the project and getting that education effort in place. I think the numbers and even the dashboard really speak to that's such a huge component of it, in my view anyway. Is you guys got the word out ahead of time, and that made the data collection and getting people on board a whole lot easier, a whole lot quicker. What about ongoing education? What are some of the tools you're using for ongoing education?
So enter our vendor with ongoing education. We actually have several, it's kind of the staff probably rolls their eyes every time I say this, but we kind of have an approach in this office is you kind of throw a lot of things against the wall and see what sticks. So education, not just GIS, but universally in this profession, is in just dire need of being put out there and being made available to those that are using it 24/7 and having, you know, I hate to say real time, but current access to all of that. So we actually have during the pandemic, gone through the procurement process of a learning management system, and Adam can speak to that if anybody needs to know the bumps and bruises he has on that along the way. But at this point, it's whatever we can do. We have found this past year to be considerably difficult because in-person possibilities were not possible. It just, people didn't deem it safe to do so, and we were under such travel restrictions. But with all that said, this is a continuous, just a continuing education campaign. And that's one of the things that different vendors will bring different proposals to you as far as how they will continue that education. You among your staff and whatever programs that you're running, you'll develop whatever your roadmap is for education and just see it through from there. But I'll just say that one of the good things, I won't say the one, but one of the good things that has come out of this past year and the inability to have in-person meetings is all the virtual training that's become available. It's there ready to consume. So I would encourage anybody that, you know, kind of feels like they have a gap in something, reach out, but and consume whatever's out there. I mean, sessions just like this, they're being recorded, they're available from a number of outlets. But I think I probably got a little sidetracked to your question, John, but yes, continuing education, we're for it, you know.
Excellent. So, you know, we know that projects tend to evolve over time. You know, from your perspective, what's the differences from what you're seeing today as what you thought the expectations were, say, 6, 8, 10, 12 months ago, and realizing that 2020 was just a crazy year for everything, and there was a lot that changed in 2020. But what's your perspective today?
I'll speak to that. I think there was an expectation as far as the how much data existed out there. We, I think, thought there might have been more than we found, but we've also been pleasantly surprised at how much is in places that we thought might not have any data, particularly with the GIS project. As far as lessons learned or advice, I mean, if we had the time to put forth an assessment statewide, then I would definitely suggest that. I don't know that we covered it with the funding question earlier, but
We didn't.
the vast majority, or at least the initial lift of this GIS project, is being paid for in part by the federal 911 grant, which there is a ticking clock associated with that. That is March 30th, 2022. So given that process and how the money was awarded, and then our own procurement process here in Alabama, we've ended up with somewhat of a compressed timeline, or we have a ticking clock. As I said, that's probably the best metaphor to use. So we've kind of been doing the assessment as we're going, which is fine too. You know, but that's the biggest thing is, if you know what you have to work with or what you think you're going to have to work with, your RFP can probably be more detailed. Ours had to be, I'll call it all encompassing, because we weren't 100% certain what we're getting into. It's also had to have been shifted a little bit as far as the services, you know, for GIS work. So if you have time to do a GIS assessment, you should do so. But it's not the end of the world. You can still make good headway without that. You just sometimes have to be more creative.
Well, we are up right on the hour here. I want to end out with one more question. I'm happy to, I've got a ton more questions I want to ask you, but I want to be respectful of everybody else's time and getting to other sessions as well too. So first off, before I ask this last question, thank you and thank everyone that attended for joining us today. Thank the Alabama team so much for doing this with us. Great discussion, great presentation. And so my final question, how does this GIS project compare to other statewide projects you've been involved with? And so would you say is it more hands-on? Is it just give me a comparison between that and other statewide projects?
I'll take it since I've been here from the beginning, and they've already spoken to. They came in a little later in the lifespan of the state board. I would just say there's not really a comparison. Every one of these projects facilitated at the state level brings its own set of discoveries, problems, solutions.
Flair, if you will.
Flair, if you will. Yes, absolutely. So I will say, and I've told these two guys to my left and right, that this is one of those projects, because of my workload and time commitments as the director, I haven't been able to be as hands-on with a GIS project as I typically would have been, which drives a person with my personality crazy. So I'm having to trust these two guys to drive this project forward and keep me in the know on what I need to be in the know on. And I'll also like to say that I don't GIS, so you probably don't want me too heavily involved in the project either. But I'll just say I don't think there's a comparison. And I think if you look around at other state programs and other roadmaps, you'll see all sorts of combinations and timeframes and different orders of these statewide programs. And I say this in just about every presentation that NG9-1 comes up in: just get started. There is no specific order. There's no specific way. There's no right or wrong. It's just get started and get moving in that direction, so that you don't have your citizens and those sitting in the seats, as well as those first responders, out there without the tools that they need to get the help that they need.
All right, guys. Well, I hate to end it. I hate to end the discussion. I've enjoyed this, and again, thank you guys so much for doing this. I think we took care of all the questions and answers in the chat. If not, I'll go back through them and make sure that we get an answer to everyone. And again, thank everyone for attending today, and we really appreciate it. I'll let you guys get back to the rest of the conference.
Thanks,
Thanks,
guys.
guys.
Thank you all.